Project here is, you can see the DMX controller over here is a Chauvet Foot C2 is the name of the unit. So that's actually like a stomp box type foot controller for DMX. It has 1 to 24 scenes, that's an individual static lighting, and 1 to 12 chases, which means you can have 36 possible combinations from the controller. The problem is that the controller, be quiet, my dog. The trouble is the foot controller requires that you actually do two actions. You move from one scene to the next and you push the enter button. I'll go through that anyway. The functionality of the foot controller doesn't make it convenient. What I want to do is just push one button and have it scroll up through all the 36 possible options, and to be able to mix the scenes and the chases together, and do that through an Arduino controller. I'm using an Arduino Pro Mini, and simply have one remote ground foot switch, momentary switch. It'll be to control terminal 4. No reason, 4 is the number, and the programming in the Arduino Mini will basically be that every time the foot switch is pushed, it goes up, scrolls up one increment through the scroll of 36. Every one of those increments could be a scene or a chase. They're set in a pattern, so you don't just have static scenes, 24 static scenes and then 12 chases. They're mixed together. Once it gets to 36, the maximum number, it starts back at 1 again. So all you do, every song you push the button, you get a different lighting scene. Chauvet Foot C2. It operates, I'll turn it on. So you can see it's like foot stomp mode. And the way it works is you just press, you have to do two actions. You press up, I want scene 2 now, and you press enter. Then you go up, I want scene 3, and you have to press enter to activate it. Then if you want to have, instead of a scene, you want to have a chase, you have to change mode, and you have to say I want this chase, and then press enter. Okay, the wiring to control unit, pretty simple. On the top left hand you can see a brown wire, that's ground, and on the bottom right hand corner you can see a white wire going to control terminal 4, that's for the remote switching. The other two wires, you can see the bottom right hand orange is the serial out, TX is transmit, RX is receive, so we're wired to the TX. And the other white wire on top right is VCC 5 volt voltage. So the orange and top right hand white wires are going to this 5-pin DIN connector here. Let me just see if I can turn that around and have a better look at it. Right. So you can see with these 5-pin DIN connectors I use for Midi, the two outside terminals at 9 and 3 o'clock generally are redundant, sometimes used for phantom power, or they might want to combine transmit and receive in one Midi special application, but the general configuration is pins which are 4 and 5, which are at 11 and 1 o'clock, are used for Midi. The 12 o'clock pin, well, I think it's pin 1, is for ground. So if you want to have a long run of Midi cable and shield it, you can shield it to ground. Mostly in short applications you don't have to. And the only trick here is that the pin 5, the white wire, in the circuit you've got to have and that's the white wire is the one going to the 5 volt power supply, you've got to have a 220 ohm resistor connected in that circuit. And I was emphasizing 220 ohm because if you're like me and you don't really pay a lot of attention, you assume that everything you generally use with resistors, it's in thousands of ohms. So when I was first doing this, I bought a 220k ohm resistor, which is and it never worked. I could never figure out why. It took me a long time to realise, you know, it was a simple mistake. And then followed up by buying a 22 ohm, 22R is how they is how they describe that value, which is 22 ohm. Just be careful to get 220 ohm. Anyway, that's just me expressing my frustration with my own mistakes. And that's the way it's wired. I've just connected the power connector to the power supply. It's giving it 5 volts. And that's now connected to the Arduino Mini, which nothing wants to focus. Okay, so all I'm doing now is making the circuit by touching the ground to the terminal 4. As I connect it, you can see it's going through scene, chase number 10, scene number 20, if we can get back a bit, chase 11, scene 22, 23, chase 4, 12, scene 13, scene 1. So all I'm doing is keep making that circuit, and it's scrolling through everything. Very good. So that's simply it. The next step is the next part of this process is to show how the programming's done, and also I think the final installation will be, I'm going to try and install these couple of components inside this unit. Alright, we're looking at the programming side of this thing. The first thing is to look at this sketch, which I'll attach to the YouTube post. Is we're using 96% of dynamic memory. So with this code, and there's not much you can trim out of this, it can be trimmed a bit. There's not much more you can do with this particular Arduino Pro Mini clone, at least with its memory size. I think it's the smaller memory size chip. A couple things to look at in the code is, firstly, there's an array called DMX list, which shows all the 36 increments, but it puts them in range in terms of saying 1 through 24 are scenes, 25 through 36 are chases. So you can see how I'm mixing in scenes and chases together. It works out about one every now and again. You'll see a number above 25, so that'd be scene, I guess scene, chase number 3, however it works out. Anyway, that's how you mix them up. So also the DMX channel is set by this variable here. Ignore that AF channel. It's the DMX channel is 4. The other thing is, I should have done this in the code, but the MIDI begin 4 should be, you could use the DMX CH command there, and you can see in this particular program here, that's where it's using every time you push the switch to control terminal 4, the patch value goes up by 1, and what this does is say the required MIDI command is MIDI send note on, so it's not control change or program change, it's MIDI send note on. It looks up in that DMX array the value that corresponds to
the current value, patch, let's say that was equal to 3, so look up the third one on the DMX list. That's the program change number 12. You could use virtually any program change number. I've used 12. I think it works. I've picked that at random, and that's where you put in the DMX channel, which is channel 4, and that's you set the channel on the receiving unit. And that's the only other thing to know about the code. You could look at the code. It's fairly, I mean, there's 113 lines of code here, so not that much in it. The only other thing to remember on the hardware side is here's our Nano, and it doesn't have a USB serial interface. You have to have get a separate piece of hardware for a USB serial interface. Most Arduino boards have the serial interface. This one doesn't, because it makes it a smaller, simpler board. So you get this. This is a USB connector, one of the smaller. It's not the same as you use for Android, but it's one of the smaller USB connectors. And it basically has, even though there's 5 wires, it has 4 connections. It sends power, positive and negative, and this has TX and RX, so transmit and TX, and receive RX. So the only trick here is you have reciprocal terminals on the Arduino Pro Mini board. So the TX, the transmit from here, has to connect to the RX, the receive here, and vice versa. The transmit TX here has to connect to the RX here. That's about it. So that's the only complication with program, where normally you just plug your USB cable straight into your Arduino board. You need this piece of hardware here. And the other thing is that the particular, let me try and remember what the particular, I'm just opening another file that'll tell me. Open recent. Yeah, on this particular board, its specs are, this is one of the earlier versions of this thing I did. I forgot to put this message, but it's 18 mega, 168, 5 volt, 16 megahertz. So when you look at in here in the tools, and you want to pick what kind of board you have, you're picking Arduino Pro Mini, and the processor is that one. If you don't get that right, you have problems in that it won't work. So that's about it. The next step is to look at how we could mount it inside the unit. Alright, I've taken this thing apart. It's not that difficult. About 6 or 8 screws to remove, and it pulls apart easily. There's the switch interface board for the switches and top panel, LEDs, etc., and for displays. And here's the controller board here. If you have a look at that controller board, there's a couple of ICs in there and a few other things, so not a lot to it. So looking at that board, you can see where that mounts to the back panel input outputs, including there's the power switch there. So I've worked out, looking at these 2 connectors here, where the where to wire to the black wire is going to the negative from the input power jack here, and the brown wire is going to the one of the switch terminals. So the first switch terminal without the wire is the positive voltage going from the input jack to the point of the switch, and the brown wire is connecting to the other point of the switch where it's when it's thrown. So that gives me power supply to my power board, and my power board is connected to my Arduino Pro Mini here. I've worked out with the MIDI connector what the correct panels are, and there's already some holes in the in this board that I've put the wires through, so I'm connecting to the pin 4 and 5 here, and they're connected to the Arduino mini board. So right, I've plugged the power lead into the power connector there, and I've got these power board insulated from the chassis, same with the Nano. If I turn this on, we have everything powered up, and if I can somehow maneuver this thing to turn over, there we go, I'm connecting the wires, it's doing what it should be doing. So the last thing to do is to take these two wires and put a somewhere in the back, put a hole for a phono jack for the foot switch. That's the last thing. So that worked out reasonably well. I haven't done the haven't mounted these on the board, so I'll do all that next and put it back together. Right, back again. We've got everything set up. All the hardware has been installed, so I just cut out a bit of plastic here to mount the two boards on that plastic. I'm going to put a cable tie around each of those to hold them in when I've finished. And I've installed the jack for the external remote there. There it is there, if you can see. Let's get a bit of light on the subject. I've got a plug in there. So here we go. I've got the other end of that phono cable there with the wire here to form the switch, and we'll engage that. So I can just plug an external foot switch into that. Bit of tape here to stop to hold things down, and a bit of tape to stop this board bouncing too much. Pulled down with a bit of tape, and that's about all there is to it. So all I've got to do now is, as I said, put a couple of cable ties to hold those, small cable ties to hold them in place, and put it back together, and it's done. Well, here it is all put back together. Plug the guitar cable in there. Made a I'm just putting there's the whole cable. I made a foot switch out of some old stuff I had laying around, an old box. Put a momentary switch in it, and get it out of the way. Yeah, that's better. All works.